Welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, making meaning and creativity. Thanks for joining us this week. We've been away for a little while. I've just had a massive crashy period, but it's been good to have the brain fog lift a little bit and set out on this new mini project that we've got. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine, Carol, on the internet, talked about grief and living with grief and chronic illness. And it's something we've been thinking about on the podcast, Dov and I, for doing for a while now, and talking about living grief and how we process it while living with ME or chronic illness. So it's actually turned into a bit of a mini-series, and I put out a call online asking if people wanted to share their experiences of grief while living with ME or chronic illness, and there was significant interest. So we've had input from all sorts, from mini interviews that I've done, which are coming up in the coming weeks, to people that have submitted audio pieces and people that have submitted things in writing. So on this episode, we'll have 5 unique voices, including those with ME, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, fibromyalgia and MS. The first voice you'll hear is Laura, who writes and records music about her illness experience. She's given us permission to use her song Nobody Knows in the podcast, and we've used this song throughout. Then we'll hear from Steph, who's a great supporter of our podcast, and that'll be followed by a friend of mine, Katie, who has some really useful thoughts about grief and intersectionality. Then Joe, who I like to call the Queen of Twitter. Joy then shares her experiences of degenerative MS. And we finally hear from Paul, who talks about having to reduce his professional music output in order to manage his ME symptoms. So there'll be a number of episodes coming up on the topic of grief and chronic illness in the coming weeks. And some really interesting conversations that I've had really about how to process this, or not even how, but just people sharing their stories and experiences, and maybe little bits and pieces about what helps get them through and process life with sort of debilitating chronic illness. So also coming up in the next few weeks, I've got 2 interviews that I'm really looking forward to on the creative side of things, with artist Christina Baltier and children's author Sally Doherty, which I'm really looking forward to. So in the meantime, just sit back and listen and enjoy this episode.
So grief is a very big topic, especially when you've been sick for 46 years. And I don't know even where to begin. I think when I first became ill, I was really young, and I had to deal with the shock of not being well, because I was used to being well. I was a skier. I started skiing when I was 5. I was a swimmer. I swam a mile every day after classes in college. That's where I was when I fell apart. I was in my 3rd year of college. And, I hiked in the mountains because I lived in Boulder, Colorado at the time, and I just was very fit, active. My pulse at rest was 50. And suddenly, I couldn't stand up in the morning and walk to the bathroom. And so, I really literally couldn't believe how sick I was. It was like I just couldn't wrap my head around it, because I was not supposed to be so ill. This wasn't supposed to happen to me, So there's a lot of denial of reality, because it was too hard to embrace the truth of it. And there was just a lot of heart-wrenching pain of taking what I thought was my life and seeing it from this perspective of now I'm a sick person, and which I eventually had to get to because I wasn't going to be able to take care of myself if I continued to try to push through it. And then, of course, there was the horror of the doctors who treated me with such utter contempt and disdain. And the first doctor I saw didn't even look up from his clipboard. And his nurse told me that they'd concluded that I was homesick because it happened a lot to third-year college students. And then the second doctor, who was supposed to be this really excellent internist who was very good at diagnosing problems that were difficult, my friend had talked me into going to see him. And he just sat there smiling at me. And I said, I'm really, really sick. And he said, well, gee, you look just like my daughter. And I don't know what to say. He said, do you ski? And I said, yes, I used to ski, but I'm too sick to do that now. I can barely stand up. I'm in bed most of the time. And he said, well, maybe you'd feel better if you started skiing again. And I walked out of there thinking I had wasted my time and energy on this idiot who was giving me nothing. I wanted an answer. I wanted a cure. I wanted to be done with this. I wanted to have a life again. I wanted to ride my bike to school, take my courses, swim a mile after classes, go home, have enough energy to go out with friends, and function like a normal 20-year-old. But that was not the case. I was going to be bedridden for a while. And then it started to hit me, the grief, the real grief, where it was just like I was being treated with resentment by my boyfriend, who called me a basket case and a geriatric case and a drag, and my friends who just disappeared, and my family members who believed that I must be faking it because I couldn't possibly be this sick. So I was a malingerer and a faker and a liar. And I was just devastated. And I just would sit in bed and bawl my eyes out. And I cried so hard that I would have to use a bath towel to blow my nose in because I would go through a box of Kleenex in no time. And I needed to just let it out. I got to a place where it just really, really had to start coming out. And also, I had to get in touch with my anger eventually because I went through a stage where I just felt like I was in depression with this illness a lot. And it was my anger that got me to a place where I felt like I could stand up for myself against people who were mean and who were saying things to me that were absolutely, bullshit untrue. And I was in psychotherapy for that. I actually had started psychotherapy before I even became ill because I had grown up in a very dysfunctional, abusive home, and I needed to get my boundaries to be more healthy, and I needed to learn, how to defend myself against abuse. And what's interesting is that, people, and I'm not saying that psychotherapy will help you with the physical aspects of this disease at all. It does not, because I'm proof of that. I did lots of psychotherapy. But if you have a good psychotherapist who's supportive and understanding and kind, they can help you cope with your disease. And so having had nobody in my life who was kind to me, besides my cat, I needed to talk to my therapist on the phone once a week, which I did for probably about, 8-9 years. And I had this realization that what happened was that my therapist had taught me how to stand up against the people who were accusing me of being a psych case. So the story kind of flipped, It's like, go to psychotherapy. That's what you need. That's what you need. Well, guess what? I don't want you in my life anymore. I did go to a psychotherapist, and goodbye. So that's it. I mean, I have so many years of illness that I can't cover this in talking in 10 or 15 minutes, and I don't want to talk for an hour. But I had a lot of things happen besides falling apart with ME. Oh, and by the way, I did not have a correct diagnosis for my illness until 33 years later. So it took a while before I knew what was wrong with me. In the meantime, I would go on a roller coaster ride of getting like a little better, like just barely functional, and then crash. And then, a little bit better, I'm back in classes at school again. And then I got struck by lightning, literally. And that annihilated my nervous system, put me back at square one, took me quite a bit of time to start to recover, which I did. And then a few years later, I crashed again because my neighbor sprayed pesticide on his fence and wrecked my health with that. So there was, other things happen when you have an illness for a long time. You're not just dealing with the ME, you're also dealing with accidents and poisonings and everything else that life has to offer, both good and bad. And what else can I say about grief? I think that in general, I cope with my feelings through music and art. I paint them when I can, and I write songs when I can, and play my guitar and, just try to get it out, try to express honestly what I'm feeling in a creative way. And that is my saving grace. I say, art is my personal savior. Creative expression is my personal savior. So that is, a bit of my story, and I hope it's helpful for other people.
Deep shade of purple. Here I am in a song like a dirge. Here I am painting black rainbows in a storm full of thousands of words. Thousands of words. How much more patient could I possibly be? And how much more proof do you need? How much more time will roll by before the truth is finally free?
Hi Daniel and Dove, this is Steph. Firstly, huge thanks for your podcast, which makes a world of difference, and I know it costs you guys a lot in spoons. So thank you so much for doing it. Just to add to your section on grief in chronic illness, my own situation is that I had a chronic spinal pain and injury at 23. That was 32 years ago. I then developed fibromyalgia and was diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I've been pretty debilitated for over 30 years. The grief has been a huge part of it, and it's not something that's been dealt with once. It comes and goes and is highlighted by events that I can't attend or things that come up that I wish I could be at. I used to be very active cycling, and I went out and about a lot, had a lot of friends, had a career as a counsellor working with families of addicts. And all of this I've lost, including my marriage. I'm extremely grateful I was able to have 2 children before the fibromyalgia really kicked in. And my girls are amazing carers and support to me, and kind of like my reason for living, really. How do I deal with grief? Well, I just kind of have to try and be thankful for the things that I do have in my life, but it is also incredibly hard to miss out on a lot of things, and really difficult to explain to people that don't understand that I can't do things, or the payback will be too bad, or that this is an ongoing thing and I'm not going to get better. In terms of coping strategies for other people, I guess I do a gratitude diary, either written down or in my head, where I try and every night think of 3 things to be grateful for, even if it's just my warm bed and my Snoopy blanket. But I really feel for everyone who's in this situation with me, and only people who are in it really get how hard it is to miss out on really big, exciting things and also fun things. I used to have a season ticket at a football club, and I used to love dancing, and this illness has taken all of that away from me. So hope that's helpful, and keep up the good work. Really grateful for everything you do. Thanks.
Here I am, broken and true. Here I am, drifting through nothingness. You can't see me, but I can see you. I can see you. Here I am with all that I've got. Here I am with nothing to hide. Here I am with the air as my witness and a daunting task to abide.
Hi Dan and Dov, this is Katie, and here are some of my thoughts on grief. First of all, I want to acknowledge the privilege that I have in dealing with grief, that I have a partner and home comforts and monthly counselling, and also that I was never planning on having children, which I think is a huge thing for some people with ME if they haven't been able to have any. And these things have all made grieving easier over the years. So I think grief has a cumulative effect, and everyone's experience of illness-related grief will be different and affected by other sources of grief in our lives. I've felt lucky not to have experienced the death of anyone very close to me, at least none that triggered intense or long-lasting grief, until I was in my early 40s. But I felt I already knew grief pretty well in other ways. For example, I took a long time to process my difficult relationship with my dad since my teens, which was essentially a 2-decade grieving process. My sister got an infection and developed ME when she was 11, and I didn't really have a lot of feelings about that until later. I was only 13 at the time, and she didn't have any diagnosis, and we just didn't understand what was happening. But after I also became unwell, and I understood more about what she must have been through, I definitely felt grief for us both and for my mum. A kind of shared family grief that we can't do a lot of things we would have expected to, and with us just both living in pain and struggle for the majority of our lives, and the repercussions on uncertainty, our confidence, sense of identity, and missed opportunities. And I think the lack of a defined death for these losses makes it hard to grieve, because we might get better and see people or places again. And initially, so many of us are told that we will improve, and this defers the grieving process from really starting. I think there's nothing to really hold on to as a definite loss. I find it really unhelpful to be told that I would improve, and I came down with a bump around year 7 when I developed POTS and had to give up my part-time work. The plateau phase had ended, and as hard as that had been to live with, I'd managed not to fully come to terms with the likely permanency of my illness until that point. Being gaslit about the nature of ME certainly has been harmful emotionally, and even when I haven't believed it for a long time now, it still hurts, partly because I know it's still harming others who are just at the start. And this brings me to collective grief. I think being a member of this community of chronically ill people has been so rich and wonderful in many ways for me, but it's also really hard. Nearly all my friends have ME, and even my healthy friends and family have often become chronically ill over time as we all age. Personal grief and fear of the future is intensified by witnessing the extremes of suffering in others. And in April 2020, one of my closest friends with ME and chronic pain died. Her name was Dynamo. Another mutual friend has been so unwell with very severe ME for many years and has barely been able to text me in any depth or even to think adequately or feel or process her grief for Dynamo since that time. There is a huge ongoing grief in watching friends suffer and become less and less able to be in touch over time. It's so full of uncertainty and fear in a way that grief for death that has happened is not. Sharing the same diagnosis brings another level to it. As members of this community, we're more likely to lose friends. Even witnessing the steady trickle of death notices online can be hard, and I knew at some point I would probably lose someone much closer to me. It happened in quite an unexpected way, and that is destabilising. Grief is mixed with anger that after so many decades there is so little to offer people with this disease, or indeed chronic pain in general. There is also a collective grief in the disability illness communities for loss of trust in government or medical and research systems. A loss of innocence that there will be disability benefits, social care and medical treatment, or even adequate pain relief when it's needed. There's a loss of trust in family and friends if they're not being believing and supportive. The pandemic has been a great source of grief for me. There hasn't been any ceremony, I don't think, to acknowledge the deaths or disability so far. It laid bare much of the ableism that was always there. Neither government nor most people, even ones that know us, are trying to prevent more people getting chronically ill, nor taking the risks of long COVID into account in their personal risk assessments, despite conservative estimates of 1 in 10 infections leading to long COVID and evidence of cumulative damage. There is grief for me in the othering of chronically ill and disabled people and the disregard for our lives. That this disregard is typified by people ignoring our voices and simply following the herd with their behaviour, or believing what they read in the media is frightening to me as right-wing populism seems to make gains, alongside environmental chaos and war. This ties in with the disregard for the planet and humanity as a whole, and can lead me to some pretty dark places when I contemplate the future, either my own or the wider future. I think being queer and disabled or chronically ill have only added to my awareness of politics and care about injustice, which began mainly with vegetarianism and feminism pre-illness. I think our experience of grief is very much impacted by our intersectional identities such as race, sexuality, gender, and experiences such as having experienced violence or oppression in the past. While we can all care about Black lives, women's lives, trans lives, or even ME lives, I think the grief is intensified when it feels literally personal. I can no longer separate the struggles. This makes me realise that activist grief is a thing, that I don't feel able to do more. The layers of grief impact each other and are hard to manage.
How much more patient could I possibly be? And how much more proof do you need? How much more time will roll by before the truth is finally free?
Hi, it's Katie again. I wanted to also talk about a specific way that my grief has manifested itself over recent years, as my ability to leave the house has got less and less. I found it really challenging to enjoy the times where I did go out and found myself in a beautiful place, having a really nice experience, without crying. Every time I would manage to get down to the beach, which is literally 2 minutes from my door, so it's actually the easiest things for me to be driven down to the beach. And I can just stay in the car, or I can transfer onto a bench and put my feet up and just sit there. And it's been much better lately, but for a long time, very regularly, when I would manage to get out and I'd be sitting in the sunshine and it would just be glitteringly beautiful, and I would just be overwhelmed with emotion, and I'd have to have a little cry before I could kind of settle and fully enjoy it and be there. And sometimes I wouldn't even be able to feel like I really was there. I would get very kind of surreal feeling. And I think it's grief, because when you're actually there and it's so real, you know in such an embodied way what you've been missing out on, and also the fragility of how hard it was to get there, how many days inside you've had to be able to get this opportunity to be out, and how every time I was just so acutely aware that it might be the last time that something could happen, and I suddenly would lose the ability to be able to get out. So it's a very vulnerable feeling, and a feeling of all the stuff that I'm missing out on through not being able to go out every day. And for ages I'd never heard of anyone discussing this kind of feeling or experience, and then I read a book by Brené Brown, and she talks about foreboding joy. This is a quote from her. Scarcity and fear drive foreboding joy. We're afraid that the feeling of joy won't last, or that we won't be enough, or that the transition to disappointment, or whatever is in store for us next, will be too difficult. We've learned that giving in to joy is, at best, setting ourselves up for disappointment, and at worst, inviting disaster. And we struggle with the worthiness issue. Do we deserve our joy, given our inadequacies and imperfections? What about the starving children and the war-ravaged world? Who are we to be joyful? And I think the way that this relates to the experience of chronic illness is that, for me anyway, I'm afraid the feeling of joy won't last, and that it won't be enough. In the quote she says, and that we won't be enough. But I feel like, for me, it's that small half an hour of joy isn't enough to counteract the days or weeks that I've had to endure since the last time, that the balance isn't there. And then when she says, what about the starving children and the war-ravaged world, it's carrying the collective grief for all the people who are completely housebound and isolated, who haven't experienced this magical type of thing for sometimes decades. And that's so hard to hold in that moment, in that very brief moment. How lucky I am, and also how unlucky I am. And it's just such a lot all at once. The other place where I've heard people talk about this kind of experience is somebody with severe ME. and that's Naomi Whittingham on her blog A Life Hidden. It's just alifehidden.com, and the post is called Glimpsing the World, My Joy and Pain, and I really recommend that. All of her blog posts, but that particular one talks about this experience of going out and being completely overwhelmed and the tears and grief that can often follow.
Here I am, reduced to my breathing. Here I am, fully disclosed. Here I am, and it feels like I'm bleeding into space, and nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
There's so much to say about grief in ME and other energy limiting illnesses. It's unique, really, I think, in our situation. I grieve for all the little things, obviously, like losing my independence, my sense of self, my identity sometimes, certainly my sense of agency, the grief of losing the ability to make decisions for yourself and then carry those decisions out. All of those things, they hit you at different times during the illness. Because I think at the beginning, you think it's temporary, so you don't tend to grieve so much. You're just a bit angry that you can't do things, or a little bit sad that you can't do things. But as the years go on, it turns to grief because you realise that part of you has gone, or maybe that time certainly has gone. You can't get that back. And you grieve the things that you never thought you would. I grieve mostly for the loss of relationships. Friends have been really good, actually, and carried on coming despite it all. But it's a different kind of friendship now because I haven't got a lot to talk about that I've actually done. I can talk about politics and the world and gossip, stuff like that, but I can't contribute much from my experiences. But like I say, people still keep coming, but I do grieve that it's a bit different from how our relationships were in the past. We're not going out, we're not making new memories together, that sort of thing. I grieve for the relationship I've lost with my son. It's not all lost, but we've had a good couple of years where I couldn't be the mum to him that I wanted to be or hoped I'd be or thought I was. He had to go through some stuff of his own, which he would have landed on me and we would have chewed the fat, we'd have gone out, we'd have had a meal together and little drives to the seaside and talked it all over, but we weren't able to do any of that. I tried to give him the most time that I could, but it's just so exhausting and I don't think I gave him the best. But, you know, he's okay. He's an adult. He's finding his own way, as we all do. And he's doing really well with his life. But, you know, there's some sticky patches and he would have liked my input because I raised him on my own from when he was 3. So we've got quite a strong bond. And I was always the linchpin in his life that he turned to for advice or to use as a sounding board. So I wasn't really available for that. I am now, but I think something's been lost in those intervening years that we might never get back. But, you know, that it is what it is, and I've got time to rebuild that. What I haven't got time to rebuild and is, well, it'll go with me to my grave, is the last 2 years of my mum's life. I was her carer, her main carer, and then when I got struck down, I couldn't do anything for her at all, other than try to manage her life from my sickbed, which wasn't always successful. And unfortunately, she deteriorated because I wasn't there every day looking out for her or organising things for her, getting her food, etc., all those things. And she ended up in a care home for the last 2 years, and of course COVID well and truly royally messed that up and made it a lesser experience than it would have been ordinarily. And I try, the way I deal with that grief is because it's a double grief. The grief I couldn't give, that I couldn't give the care I wanted to, and the grief of her dying. So all of that, I put a very firm lid on it, and it might not be good. The psychologists tell you it's not good to do that, but it is the only way I can survive it, really, without damaging myself. Because if I let myself think about it, it's too big. It's huge. It's too big. And I just fear that if I open that little door to that grief too wide, it'll all come flooding out and I won't be able to shut that door again. So my way of coping with it, and I've come to terms with it, I'm quite content with the way I'm dealing with it, is to put a lid on it. Now, every now and then the lid pops off. Not very often, but it does, and I'm absolutely poleaxed. And of course I have a few hours of crying and feeling sorry for myself and feeling sorry for Mum and feeling sorry for everything, but then I can get over that little bit. I don't want to dwell on it forever. But of course then you get the PEM from that crying and letting those emotions out. So it's doubly cruel is ME. So thank you, Daniel, for letting me speak on this. I've got so much to say on it. I mean, you can't touch on everything, can you? I've lost also the relationship with my husband, haven't I? The one we signed up for when we got married 9 years ago. This isn't what we signed up for. We signed up for fun and enjoying the last years of our lives together, doing extraordinary things together. We didn't do great big things. Our lives were quite small, but we loved our life. We'd got it just right. We got it exactly how we liked it. And then this came along and messed it all up. And I've taken that from him, haven't I? Because it doesn't just impact my life, of course, it impacts the life of him, his family, everybody around us. So, you know, there's some words I want to say about ME, but they're probably not broadcastable. But anyway, thank you for letting me have my little say. I've probably whittled on for far too long, but I wanted it out there. It's out there in the universe, and that's great. It's there forever. Thank you very much.
Here I am, reduced to my breathing. Here I am, fully disclosed. Here I am, and it feels like I'm bleeding into space, and nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
And I think that's part of the grief too, is that having an acquired chronic illness really gives you an understanding of the divide between this cultural myth that illness is something that doctors treat and you recover from, versus the reality that anyone, anywhere, at any time might become permanently disabled. And prior to COVID, you know, I'd found community and really gotten deep into disability culture and things like that. And there's a group on Twitter called NES Void that I found, No End in Sight Void, hashtag NEIS Void, that I found that was a lot of people with various chronic illnesses across the spectrum. And I found informal support with other people with chronic illness was better for me than formal support, because formal support through a hospital or other organization tends to still be kind of steeped into that health culture, and patient communities can be I think, more honest and more grounded with each other than the more formal institutional stuff. And like, I've been very fortunate in that I've had the same doctor throughout my MS journey. Well, pretty much. I've had 2 doctors, one of which who was with me early on, and then he left and was an MS researcher and took a job out west. And so one of his colleagues who also did research took me on as a patient, and that's who I've been with for a while. And I like my neurologist. I think I'm grateful. I have a better relationship with my care team. I'm grateful that I have a better relationship with my care team than I know many people do. But there's still stuff that he just doesn't get. And that very few people who haven't experienced chronic illness themselves really get. Because having to come to terms with this isn't going to go better is its own unique journey of grief and anger and fear and frustration and resignation and denial, and you have to get through that to find hope again and to figure out, okay, well, since I don't have all of these things that I took for granted that I was going to have for the rest of my life, what does that mean for me? What are my goals now? What does a good life look like? How do I prepare for disease progression? And you're also, at the same time, bumping up against more and more everyday ableism. And the more impaired you get, the more you realize how little support there is for people with disabilities and people with chronic illness out in the world. And particularly with neurodegenerative disorders or anything that's a body system-wide disorder. And it's not visible. It's not like a broken leg or it's not something people can see. People who don't have pain every day have no idea what that feels like. And disability stigma, really changes the way people who haven't experienced chronic illness see and interact with people who do. You become invisible to a lot of people, or you become childlike to a lot of people. And your personal agency becomes harder to enforce. Boundaries become harder to enforce. And there's grief in that too. And chronic illness is traumatic. And ableism is traumatic. And trying to learn how to navigate these things without support, because there's no, you don't get like a disability guidebook or anything like that. You have to go to a bunch of different places to get support. That's hard. There's a lot that goes into it. And I've had periods post-MS where I felt like I had everything together, and then something would change and the bottom would fall out, and every time I thought I had okay, this is this good, I can plateau, I can maintain here. It doesn't take much to throw that off kilter. And there are kind of these stages, when do you start using a mobility aid? When do you start asking for accommodations? How do you do that in a way that's safe? When do you need a powered mobility aid? When do you give up cooking for yourself because it's so much work? When do you realize that you're not going to be able to go anywhere without some kind of help? And in the time that my disease progression has been going on, I changed jobs twice. I bought a home. I got married. I got divorced. I gave up driving and got a mobility scooter. I moved from one city to another city to be closer to work. And crisis after crisis has kind of made me hit reset and have to readjust and realign. And also, had to really think about balancing my present needs and having a good life in the moment with my future needs, and what do I do? What do I need to do to remain independent when my physical ability gets to the point where I can't hold a traditional job anymore? Because right now I have a pretty good job and decent insurance through my employer. And as anyone who's started going through systems and looking for support probably knows already, getting support isn't easy, and you kind of have to choose between poverty of money and poverty of functional time. And so I am one of those people who chose attempted financial stability over my health over and over again, which has not been great in terms of slowing my disease progression. But I went through several periods of my life where I really didn't have much money, and they were really, really traumatic. And I decided that being able to make decisions for myself was really important. And money is one of the things that you need to be able to do that, because once you don't have your own money, then either or both institutions that you rely on for support or friends and family that you rely on for support start having much more say in what you do. The way those relationships change can be really, really hard, and there's grieving that goes on there too. Like, people I considered very close who are no longer in my life, either because they just kind of faded out or because something happened and they didn't want to deal with it anymore. I've had roommates tell me living with someone with MS is really hard. It's like, you think living with me is hard? Try being me. MS is the worst roommate, and I can't move out and go to another place to get away from them. But we only get one body. And one of the things that's helped me get through the grief is reminding myself of that. We only get one body. So the idea that, being not sick is a viable alternative to being sick is one of those cultural myths. Like, you're chronically ill. There is no, what would I be if I was not, you're not going to get better. So there's no, it's really, 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 really tempting to mourn what you thought you would have, but it's just not there. So instead you have to make the shift of, well, I have this body, and this body is crappy, and it doesn't work the way everybody else's body does, but this is it. And the alternative is not being here, not experiencing life, not being the master of your own time, not existing. And so instead of trying to chase this dream of getting healthier and regaining some function, which is really, really tempting, and I did it a lot, and I regret it now, because I believe the long-term impact of that was that I have a higher disease burden now than I might otherwise. So trying to chase this dream of what life would look like if you weren't sick is, it can be very, very, very counterproductive and harmful to oneself.
Here I am, reduced to my breathing. Here I am, fully disclosed. Here I am, and it feels like I'm bleeding into space, and nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Hello, I'm Paul. I'm a guitar player. I'm 51 years old. Guitar player, bass player. I've played keyboard, all the rest of it. Yeah, I've been a musician since I was 5 years old or something like that. About the age when you get your first school recorder. And eventually I made it my profession. I went to college, got the degree in jazz, and so I've been a performer literally all this time. It's absolutely dominated my life. And among the skills I was prized, and the kind of things I would get hired for, I suppose, were my ability to sort of think on my feet. I was always a good improviser. You chuck a few chords at me, I could rip a solo out of it or put a bass line to it without giving it a second thought. And I could play like a solo as if it was prepared. Other skills, I was absolutely shit hot at sight reading music. Anything you put in front of me, give me a couple of seconds to prepare it, and literally just that. I could play most things, if it's technically possible on the instrument. I could probably sight read it. And, these were the things which paid my bills, right up until 4.5, nearly 5 years ago now, when the ME landed. And as we know, the ME robs you of many things. It robs you of your sheer physicality. So, I can't play as fast as I did. The old fingers don't move so well anymore. And I'm much more prone to get arthritis once the winter starts to come around, which has actually just landed on me just this week. The fingers are stiffening up, the legs are stiffening up, and everything's stiffening up. So that's one thing which is, I just can't aspire to it anymore. I could practice all I like, and I can still manage to put in, better part of a couple of hours a day. And that's not all done at once, like it used to be. I'd, maybe scrape 15 minutes here and 20 minutes there, just enough to try and learn something that I need to be learning for the current project I'm on. and enough to try and maybe keep the fingers in some degree of functionality, still keep my finger independence and the hand strength from that. But I've noticed more and more of late, I've been in playing situations where I've been required to sight read, improvise, think on my feet, and I just cannot do it. I can play well, but for a given standard of well, but it's not me, it's not the professional standard, that I've held to throughout my life, and it does my head in, we're talking of grief here, so I absolutely miss it, I'm having to learn that there are just jobs, situations I just can't be in anymore, otherwise I wind up coming away, driven to tears by it, where I've been, so take a situation I was in like last week, friend asked if I'd want to come and play some jazz with him, just a pub situation, on bass, he was playing piano, backing a singer, and this is the kind of situation which I should absolutely thrive in, plenty of space to let loose and play. And I found myself just down there looking at the chords in front of me and thinking, I haven't the faintest idea what to do here. Don't know where I am, I can't see what's going on, I'm just going to have to hope it ends relatively soon. And I absolutely hated it. It was so embarrassing. And I can't say for certain anybody else noticed the holes in my playing, but I did. I absolutely did. So, I got on from that. I had to say to myself, I can't put myself in that situation again, So that's little jazz gigs, at least certainly off the cuff, unprepared ones, are absolutely not there for me anymore. That's the end of that. Theatre work. I still get the occasional bit of theatre work offered to me. And that's the kind of thing, again, I would just walk in, sit down and do it. And, without maybe 5 minutes preparation. Now it would take me, I'd want a week's preparation to do what I used to do in 5 minutes. And, you just don't get that, You very often do not get that level of that much time to prepare, So I'm going to have to start saying no to those as well. There's no more of that, whether I feel physically up to it or not. So yeah, those are just the bits of the old me, the old life, just being chipped away by this stupid disease. It's could let it be heartbreaking. It does get that way at times, Don't think of all the things you can't do, and I see friends, of going doing tours and such thing, and I just get absolutely jealous of them, if I'm quite honest. I'd love to have been off doing that. There's not one aspect of it that I can actually physically do anymore. I couldn't do the travelling, can't do the bloody playing. If I wound up in that situation, even managed to get onto the stage, I just look like some sad old git there who can hardly move. I would just find even that aspect of it totally embarrassing. It's and that's exactly what I should be doing at my time of life. Should be in my prime. Should be out there playing. Earning my living, getting the respect which I used to thrive on. It's all gone. Thanks, Emmy. Still, there are things I can do. There is some hope. I can't think on my feet. This we've been through, but I can do a certain amount if I have good preparation. So I've got lucky in a band situation I'm in at the minute, which is called the Sledgehammer Project. It's a Genesis kind of, not a tribute. We play the music of Genesis and Peter Gabriel and the rest of it. We don't wear costumes and all that silly business. But I kind of got lucky because I bumped into a drummer who also has ME. I'm not sure he has it to the same extent as I do. If he does, he hides it pretty well. So, we have that. We will be out performing next year, I sincerely hope. So that keeps me sane. I've got that much. It's not what I used to do, but hey, so hopefully see you in the festivals, maybe next year. Watch out for it, Sledgehammer Project.
Here I am, reduced